everybody. I am sitting here with Mr. Mattias Lundberg, and he is the mastermind behind the Global Youth Forum. And so I'm so happy to get in a conversation with him and pretty much just understand the background behind this initiative and what's going on at the World Bank Global Youth Forum.
Thank you. I have to say, I think you flatter me by saying that I'm the mastermind behind it. I think that's, I am only one of a very large team of people, so I wouldn't say that I'm the mastermind behind it. I think that's maybe a little bit too flattering. But so we have put together something called the Global Partnership for Youth in Development. Okay. And we want to bring young people, youth-serving organizations, international agencies, clients and partners of the World Bank to try to think about youth development in a more comprehensive way. Yeah. And the one thing we really wanted to do with this forum was also to bring in the voices of young people themselves. You know, we can sit here in Washington and have a good idea, we can pretend that we have a good idea of what young people want and what's in their best interest, but we really won't get there. We won't arrive at the right answer or a comprehensive answer without talking to young people themselves. So that's the point behind this conversation. We wanted to bring in young people, youth-serving civil society, NGOs, international agencies, governments and World Bank clients to try to have this conversation more openly and get a sense from young people as well. What are their priorities?
Okay. And so with putting this forum together, how are you getting the voices heard? Like what do you hope to get out of this once this forum is over? Implementation, action from here.
So that's exactly the right question, right? So we've all been part of, or we've attended many conferences where nice things are said and then nothing happens afterwards, right? So what we are trying to build, two things. One is that this is the beginning of a global conversation and not the end, right? This is the first of these global youth fora, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue them. And secondly, one of the questions that I asked the participants directly earlier today is, right, we can think about our lofty objectives, but what concretely do we need to achieve in the next 2 years to make this real, right? We need to understand what are the real concrete problems these people are facing, what are the real concrete steps we can take to try to help them alleviate some of these problems that they face. And this is youth-serving agencies, young people themselves. And so part of the conversation this morning was, give us your ideas, give us your concerns, tell us what we need to do now in order to make this concrete. And I think that's the way we can build something of lasting value, is if we build from the ground up.
You know, personally, I feel like we have been talking around the issues of youth. So everyone is championing youth issues and, you know, we want to solve youth challenges and we want solutions. I want us to talk about the issues themselves, right? So from where you are now, what are the issues that you see youth are facing globally?
Well, the most obvious one is employment. So there are 1.8 billion young people on the planet today. Yeah. And unemployment is much, much higher among young people than it is among older workers. So young people are 3 to 4 times more likely to be unemployed. Young people are also much more likely to be underemployed. So they're employed 8 hours a day, they're working 8 hours a day, but they're not earning 8 hours worth of income per day. So there are people who can be working very long hours, very difficult jobs, dangerous jobs, and they don't earn very much money. So the opportunities that they face are much more constrained than the opportunities that older workers face. It's much harder for young people to start businesses. It's harder for young people to get access to finance, or harder for young people to get business licenses. And the constraints that they face in entering the world of work simply are much harder, much more difficult to overcome than for older workers. So that's one. Secondly, young people are less likely to have a voice in the system. We heard today that 6% of parliamentarians around the world are young. And this is for a population that is a global population that's very close to half young, right? Yeah. 6% of parliamentarians are young. So how do young people get to express their voice in a productive and effective way? Right? How do they get into the policy process? How do young people get to have their voices heard by those who make decisions and who have authority? How can we improve the channels? How do we can expand the channels through which young people are able to get their voices heard? So those are just two issues that young people face.
Unemployment.
Yeah. Unemployment, voice in governance, right? Yeah. Voice in policy. Young people are often the victims of and engaged in violence. So it's more likely that young people are engaged in conflict and fighting than older people. That is not to say, though, that young people predominate in violence. Even in war, very, very few people are actually engaged in active conflict, right? It's a small number of people. But in cases of war, in situations of instability and conflict and war, most of the fighters are young. So how can we provide young people a broader set of opportunities to get them away from the sources of conflict and provide them alternatives to find more peaceful avenues to earn a living and to engage and to express their voice. Right? It doesn't have to be through conflict. So those are three things. Fourth, I would say reproductive health is an important issue. Young women particularly have a hard time of having access to the health services that they need. And sometimes those obstacles are institutional. The services just aren't there. Sometimes the obstacles are about mobility, right? It's harder for young women in some cases to move about and to move independently of their families. And so expanding access to public services, such as health and education, particularly for young women. So those are four. I mean, I can give you a long list.
There are a lot. So let's go back to unemployment.
Okay.
That's a big one. This is the largest generation right now, millennials, the youth, we're the most in the labor force, right now. So unemployment and underemployment as well. So somebody could have a job, right, underemployment, but then they're not earning as they should be earning to cover their expenses and the standard of living that, based on the economic situation of where they are based out of. Before I even go into solutions, talking about unemployment, one other issue that I want to even touch on is the idea of youth and volunteering. And youth, so what I've noticed really is that a lot of organizations, in the name of you want to, you're promoting or championing youth to be at the table or to solve problems or, bringing them into the organizations. A lot of them, this top names organizations, end up just having the youth volunteer or get them as interns unpaid. Meanwhile, the youth is still struggling with bills, keeping up with their educational expenses. They're still trying to stay afloat of all the other challenges that they're facing with, in terms of economic challenges. So, I mean, what do you think about that? I am a champion to volunteer. Like, I volunteer for about 3-4 organizations right now. So I understand that. But almost like it's an issue that needs to be addressed. What's your stance on that? With the youth, there has to be a balance, no doubt about that. And where's the balance drawn for young people with volunteering and also these organizations who are to encourage young people to do better? Why not hire them? Why not give them paid employment that can sustain them? That's more encouraging, I feel.
So I have a couple of answers to that.
Yes, please.
One of them is that volunteering gets you great experience. It really does. And it exposes you to a world of work if you haven't had a job before. There are many, many national programs for volunteer service and action. And many of them do an extremely good job of getting young people work experience, contacts among employers that they wouldn't have had otherwise, and experience of being in the world of work. So don't dismiss volunteering out of hand.
Oh, definitely not.
It can be profoundly important to a young person's experience, to building a resume, building contacts, building experience, and getting them into the world of work. So I think it can be profoundly important.
And I definitely agree because I volunteer for several organizations. But I guess at what point does one begin to feel valuable or valued in the workforce as a young person, especially?
So this is of great concern to the youth organizations that I deal with throughout Europe, for instance, because there are many organizations in the sort of European policy world that also hire or rather engage lots of young volunteers. And there's quite a bit of activism and quite a bit of activity now going on throughout Europe, trying to get some more formal acknowledgement of the contributions of young volunteers, to formalize their engagement and even to begin to pay them a living wage, right? So that's clearly important. Yeah. It's important with organizations, all sorts of organizations, whether it's this one or the United Nations or even private firms, right? We can think, as I said, of some of this that you get experience. It's like an apprenticeship. You serve an apprenticeship, you get skills, you get experience, you get exposure to the world of work, and that's invaluable. That really is important. Yeah. Now, let me be a little provocative and say that for most young people in the world, they don't have access to those kinds of opportunities at all, right? Most young people in sub-Saharan Africa, I mean, clearly it varies across countries, live in the countryside. They live in rural areas, right? Most people around the world live in urban or peri-urban areas. Most people in sub-Saharan Africa still live in rural areas. So the constraints that they face are not necessarily the ones of worrying about whether they're paid for an internship, right? They have other kinds of concerns. They worry about agricultural markets and prices for harvest and finding jobs in the off-season and that sort of thing. The constraints that they face are quite different. I think that Africa particularly, if we take a large part of sub-Saharan Africa, it's urbanizing very, very quickly. Yeah. Right? There's an enormously rapidly growing middle class in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's wonderful. So to some extent, and I don't mean this to sound harsh, but I think the fact that people are facing these problems is a good sign overall. This is a very different kind of problem, right, from the one that most people faced 20, 30 years ago. Right? A young person who's, say, of my generation, I'm 50-something, right? And it's a very different kind of constraint, a very different problem that young people are facing today. So overall, frankly, I think this is great, right? It's a sign of urbanization, of rapid development, the growth of the middle class, the expansion of opportunities. Now, that's fundamentally important, and we can't forget that. That said, if I am right now 20 years old, 21, 22 years old, I've finished a university degree in Nigeria or wherever, I don't find any opportunities, and the only thing available to me is to volunteer and to be an apprentice, I will be very discouraged. I can't deny that. And so we have to find a way of getting that person an opportunity while not forgetting that we need to increase the opportunities, expand the opportunities for those others who don't have the advantages that this young person has.
Okay. So we're going to still stay on employment for maybe another minute or two. So basically, so far, what are some of the ideas you've heard in terms of solutions to employment, and what is the World Bank doing to champion, solutions to employment? Okay.
Well, a couple of things, and I like the word solutions. That's one of the things we're trying to achieve. In fact, overall, we're trying to find solutions to these problems. Yeah. The first thing is to understand why people are unemployed and underemployed, right? And then figure out what are the tools we have at our disposal to try to solve these problems, right? So, and then understand also what are the more effective tools we have, the most effective solutions we have. We've spent many years working on training programs and skills training programs. That matters, they're important. We need to make sure that young people have the skills that they need in order to find the jobs and effectively employ themselves in the world of work. But we're also learning that having those technical skills isn't enough. That we need to understand the soft skills, the life skills, the socio-emotional skills that are needed to obtain a job, be successful in a job interview, work with others in a job, solve problems, deal with conflict, right? All of those things that are far beyond the how do you turn a screwdriver, very technical vocational skills. We have, as institutions, development institutions, the World Bank and others, largely focused on these technical vocational skills. We're learning now that we have to broaden our understanding of what skills are, right? So that's fundamental. Secondly, there are 1.8 billion young people in the world. Between now and 2030, we're going to have another 600 million or billion, something between there, young people entering the labor market.
2030 workforce.
The 2030 workforce, right? So when you think about that, we are not going to create enough jobs for all of those young people. There are 1 million people entering the labor force every month in sub-Saharan Africa. Right? That is a huge number of people. We can't, or given the current pace of job creation, we're not going to be able to absorb them. We have to find ways of getting these young people to create their own jobs and jobs for others. Entrepreneurship. So we're learning that entrepreneurship programs, promoting self-employment, giving people resources and the access to the services that they need to start their own businesses, that's far more effective than working on the traditional skills that we have been working on for generations. Helping people to start their own businesses, to be entrepreneurs, to be creative, to take risks, right? Giving them access to finance, access to markets, helping them register businesses. All of those things turn out to be incredibly important in helping young people find employment.
Yeah. So I think there's entrepreneurship brings in another line of challenges by itself. The issue of entrepreneurship with young people, they face, some maybe like structural policies within their countries that hinders them. Like you mentioned, also getting capital and ability to register a business, things like that play a role. And that's also part of the issues that young entrepreneurs in these countries face. Another thing I am wondering also between the idea of how the World Bank by itself works with member countries in order to drive young people to become, how do I put it, entrepreneurs, like to encourage entrepreneurship in those countries in a different way that's different from giving aid to the countries, So what are some things in place right now for, the relationship that the World Bank has with other member countries, maybe, or public-private partnerships, for instance, in a way that's just different from giving aid, but really looking at them as a place to invest in, for instance, in Africa, our countries within Africa, of course, like, a lot of young people are innovative today. They are always like on their game. Like I burst in with ideas and lots of energy. They want to be out there, but they're facing these block roads and hindrances. So how can people feel comfortable investing in developing countries, especially? And the relationship.
There were 3 or 4 questions in there, and I'll see
I know. Like to me, yes, please, please help.
All right, so I'll see if I can unpack them a little bit.
You.
Okay. So the question about getting young people into self-employment, right? Young people are enormously creative and resourceful, right? So when we talk about youth unemployment, in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, people can't afford to be unemployed, strictly speaking, right? They have to be doing something, and they do. They're incredibly creative and resourceful. They're phenomenally resourceful, right? Of starting new businesses or being entrepreneurs or being creative in the world of business. Now, what we have to do for those young people is to figure out how to make them more productive. So they're working. And they're sometimes working many, many hours a day. But they're not earning as much as they could. They're not as productive as they could. They don't have the resources to increase their productivity, right? They've entered work. So the problem is not finding them a job, right? Going from no job to job, right? That's not the issue. The job is considering that they are working, how do we make their work more productive, right? So we're trying to work with governments, with our clients and partners around the world, and taking sub-Saharan Africa as an example, aware of providing the resources, providing the tools, providing access to finance, opening up the rules about who gets to register a business, opening up rules about who gets to own businesses, who gets to own land, who gets to own productive resources, right? So working on the policy side to increase the opportunities for young people to start businesses when they haven't been able to, grow, and more importantly, grow businesses once they've started.
Is it working? Because if you also think about maybe corruption in the midst of all of this, has it been like what's working with that?
What we're finding from the literature, from the research that we're doing, is promoting entrepreneurship and self-employment can be very, very successful.
Okay.
Now, this requires that we encourage skills, that we provide skills for employment, skills for running a business, technical skills for what the business actually does can also be important. Mentoring and support over the long term can really have a big impact, right? So not just a one-time intervention where you give somebody some information and say thank you very much, goodbye, but sustained mentoring and support over a considerable amount of time, and having access to finance and the other resources that are needed to start and grow a business. Those things can be incredibly successful. They're really very, very successful.
Okay. So a young African, for instance, watching this, how can they access those things you just talked about?
They can work with municipal governments and local governments that have these programs. They are
Within
all
their
over.
countries.
They're all over the continent, right? These programs of entrepreneurship support. They're not just World Bank projects. They are often supported by the lending and technical assistance of institutions like the World Bank and others, right? Not just us.
Yeah.
We're only one player in this whole scheme of things, right? There are many organizations that are also involved in providing these services and support to the services technically and financially. The private sector itself has enormous investments in developing these skills and talents of young people around the continent, right? There are firms that I don't know the numbers, so I don't want to quote, but
Yeah.
but that provide that invest enormous sums of money because they know this is where the next generation of consumers will be, the next middle class, and the next generation of workers. So the private sector knows this. They're already engaged in Africa developing these talents and skills and enterprises among young people. There are huge numbers of programs out there throughout the continent that young people can take advantage of. I don't have a list of them. We can
Yeah.
provide them, and maybe that's a very good thing for us to do on a website,
Yeah.
is to provide examples of programs like this
Yeah.
that young people can take advantage of.
Yeah, because
They're all over the place.
yeah, and the thing is, I hear what you're saying, and even as someone who tries to be always at the table when I can, I also I feel like there's a you get lost in the context, so we know what the challenges are. We understand, like, okay, for instance, entrepreneurship is a solution, right, for young people, so, but pointing exactly to where young people can look at, if somebody watching this in sub-Saharan Africa can say, oh, okay, I'm going to go Google them and go check this organization to see if I can apply or see if they have funding for me, And also I know financing has been one of the easy financing transactions, for instance, has been one of the key things in this. M-Pesa, I don't know if,
yes.
that's one of the solutions that has been working. I think that's
Enormously successful.
Yes.
And there are others throughout the continent.
Okay.
Like M-Pesa.
Okay.
So, and that's so M-Pesa is great because it does many things. They started off as a mechanism for transactions.
Yeah.
But then they grew and they started to provide services for savings and other sorts of financial intermediation, right? Whether it's savings or borrowing and lending or financial literacy and education and capability and decision making. So they have expanded their services, I think, quite broadly and
Yeah.
very, very successfully. So M-Pesa is only one example. There are many like M-Pesa throughout the continent.
What about subsectors that young people can look at? I know agriculture has been one that they seem to be championing right now for young people.
Yeah.
What do you have to, what's your thought on agriculture and development of agriculture and also the new technologies in agriculture?
Right, so I have to tell you, I used to be an agricultural economist. In
Spot on question.
Previous life, many years ago.
Yeah.
And the point that I made earlier, that most young people still live in rural areas, is partly related to that. That the opportunities for young people in rural and sort of peri-urban areas, in between rural and urban, I think are largely going to come, at least in the next 20 years, from agriculture and agriculture-related services. But what's important there is the value added. So what can you do to add value to the product? So there is the farming side and increasing the productivity and the efficiency of farming technology and production. That's important. Increasing the efficiency of markets, making sure that the markets actually work, that people get the right prices for their products, that products can move from place to place, that people have information about what prices are available, that people have the technology necessary, you're right, to both harvest and transport and transform the product. But then thinking about this transformation part. So where the opportunities are, I think, in the short run, are in this transformation part. So moving from primary product to finished product, right? If you think about consumers in, say, the growing middle class of consumers in Lagos or in Nairobi, right? They are consuming processed products and not raw products. So, and thinking about the export markets, similarly, it's the transformed products that get exported. That's where the value is. So thinking about how to take advantage of that value chain, right? Making sure that prices work, the markets work, that information flows, that transport works, all of that is essential. And then capture that value added, capture the increased value that you can create in that value chain, in that market chain, from primary product to consumer. That, I think, is a fantastic opportunity for young people at the moment.
So agriculture, I feel like we could go on and on because it seems like when you open one issue and you talk about a solution, there's something more to it, So where are we right now? And this is also going to be, we're going to wrap up shortly. But where do we go from here? So leaving this Global Youth Forum, this conversation, the many other forums is about to be held in the next 2 days, and the amazing conversations that that is had. And I know a lot of people from all over the world came here to attend this forum. So it means it's so important. And youth issues, I mean, I think youth. We are the solutions, right? So, but where do we go from here?
No, I should be asking you. But I'll take it and I will. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, I mean, for me, I think going from here is I don't see youth as being stagnant. I feel like if we were to look at our backgrounds and look at the challenges we're facing and depend on that, we would all be stuck. But I don't see youth doing that. I am not doing that. And I know a lot of youth who are not doing that. So I feel like we are taking issues into our hands to go ahead and break forth, regardless of the challenges that we are facing. So every youth can do something, and I know a lot of impact youth networks that are making a huge difference. So now I just feel like we need partners. We need people to partner with us. We need people to invest in us. We need people to see us and see value in us. We need people to sponsor my show, for instance, invest in my show because this is doing good, So we need people who are doing stuff, who are not just sitting out there and saying, oh, this is the issue that I am with, and I just becoming victims. I don't see youth today, millennials today, being victims. I don't see that. I see people who are passionate. I see youth who are ready to who are game changers. So some of the networks I'm in, on the 30 Changemakers Next Generation Summit, and even I'm not part of Ashoka Changemakers, but they're also part of the people championing youth, and there's a lot of them, and all these networks are trying their best to get youth together to make a difference. So that's, for me, that's where we go from here. But I guess in terms of partnerships, where do we go from here?
I don't know if I can add anything to make that what you just said any better. You've hit on exactly the right points, right? Of working together, of being creative, of not standing still, of not accepting the status quo, of coming up with new ideas, of being change makers. I mean, you've partly described why I love what I do, right? It is why I really get a kick out of what I do. And it's that energy and creativity and dedication and passion and impatience that makes this really, really valuable. And those, I'm not the one who's going to find the solutions, right? I'm not. It's going to be you and your generation and your colleagues and your friends and your networks, all of the ones that you've just described. You're the ones who are going to find the answers to this. And it's not up to me, it's up to you.
And we hope you will partner with us like you are already doing. And I really appreciate you. I do appreciate you. I appreciate this forum happening. I appreciate you getting all of us at the table here today. And I thank you for sitting down with me to have this conversation.
Let's do it again a year from now and see what we've built.
Honestly, we should. Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you.